Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes for folks to come in and get settled, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you. Okay, it looks like the numbers have slowed down, so let's go ahead and get started so that we have plenty of time to discuss as we move forward. This meeting tonight, or listening session, is on state legislation related to municipal zoning and accessory dwelling units. Before we get into the presentation and the meeting, I want to go over a couple of group agreements that we ask everyone to hold to as part of this meeting. First of all, when providing feedback, please be concise. Allow everyone to speak before speaking again. We want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to be heard. Please be respectful of others and of different viewpoints. Stay on topic, the discussion of the ADU ordinance. And also, please note that this meeting is being recorded. So the purpose of this meeting tonight is to review necessary changes to the city's existing accessory dwelling unit, or ADU, or sometimes called casita regulations. These are required by the state based on a recently passed state law under House Bill 2720. Through this presentation, we're going to provide context for those changes within the city's existing ADU standards, as well as discuss and share feedback on the proposed changes, share next steps for the code amendment, and also at the end of the presentation, there will be an opportunity to provide written feedback in a written comment form, which will be posted to the chat in case people either don't feel comfortable providing verbal feedback or think of something later on after the meeting that they want to make sure that they get that point across. And so we're here because the state legislature passed a number of bills this session related to municipal zoning. These bills are intended to facilitate greater housing attainability by increasing opportunities for diverse housing types and streamlining processes to address housing availability through increased housing supply. 4 of these bills, as shown on the screen, require local municipalities to amend their zoning codes. Of these bills, the first 3 listed above, House Bill 2720, 2297, and Senate Bill 1162, have a deadline of January 1st, 2025 for municipalities to amend their ordinance to comply with the new state rules. The fourth is House Bill 2721. This is the so-called middle housing bill. That one gives, we have a bit more time to work through, and that one must be adopted by January 1st of 2026. So basically what House Bill 2720 does is it established state standards for ADUs, which the city must comply with by January 1st, 2025, as mentioned. Municipalities with populations of more than 75,000, like Tucson, must adopt regulations to allow accessory dwelling units, which we already do currently allow, but there may be some changes associated with that. In fact, there are some changes. So this new state ordinance will require modifications to our existing standards. If a municipality fails to adopt the development regulations by January 1st, ADUs will be allowed on all lots zoned for residential use within the city without limits. So that is why we are working to get this through the process, even though it's a very recently passed bill, is that we have until January 1st, or else the city will lose its ability to regulate ADUs, which we currently do regulate. So we will be discussing as we move forward the changes that will need to be made. So how we are going to conduct engagement with this particular change in due to the legislation is that first I want to note that at their June 18th, 2024 meeting, Mayor and Council authorized staff to develop standards to come into compliance with this law. So we've been asked by Mayor and Council to do this. Staff reviewed the new state requirements and identified areas where changes to existing code must occur, and we're seeking community input on the proposed changes. We had a listening session yesterday afternoon, and this is the second listening session this evening. So I want to start by really laying the groundwork of what we're talking about when we're discussing an ADU, and noting that there's a little bit of inconsistency in how the city currently defines an ADU and how the state law defines an ADU. But it's essentially an ADU is a self-contained living unit that is accessory to a principal structure located on the same lot. An ADU will have sanitary facilities or bathrooms, and there's a bit of discrepancy in terms of whether it will have a kitchen or not. But the definition per the state law says it may include its own kitchen facilities. So we'll need to work through these definitions and ensure that as part of the code amendment, we bring consistency to our definition of an ADU as it has now been defined by the state. Other regulations that are currently in place within the city include have been in place in the city since January of 2022. There is a very robust process leading up to that. They went into effect at the beginning of 2022. These regulations stipulate currently that one ADU can be built on any residential lot, which is any lot with one or two homes. An ADU can be up to 10% of the lot size or a maximum of 1,000 square feet. However, all lots are allowed an ADU of at least 650 square feet, regardless of the size of the lot. Currently, an ADU can be up to 12 feet high or up to the height of the primary structure if that structure is 2 stories. All dimensional standards regarding lot coverage and setbacks within the particular zoning district apply. And currently, an ADU requires 1 parking space. However, there are some situations such as being on a transit line or bike boulevard where those may not be required, or off-street parking can also be used. Also, a newly constructed ADU requires a cool roof. It's also worth noting that ADUs have to meet all building codes, including accessibility standards that are required for single-family homes. So they have to meet those same standards. So when the city went through the process of developing these ADU regulations that are currently in effect, we undertook a robust process. This included over a dozen community engagement meetings and numerous other stakeholder meetings to gather input and feedback. There was strong community support for the adoption of these regulations by Mayor and Council. And then following the adoption of these regulations, the city developed a resource catalog and model plan library. So I really want to emphasize the point that these regulations have been in effect for over 2.5 years at this point in time. We've had regulations allowing ADUs. So it's really, in this instance, coming down to making some adjustments to those regulations to come into compliance with the new state law. So to support the implementation of these regulations and incentivize development of ADUs, the city, in partnership with AARP, who provided grant funding, set up a casita model plan design competition. and associated model plan library. Designers were solicited to submit ADU plans that were scored by a selection committee on criteria such as universal design, sustainability, and affordability. Additionally, there was a public vote for the model plans for a People's Choice Plan to be one of the 10 selected designs that received a cash prize. With these plans, the city has waived model plan design review fees and featured them in the model plan library. This whole process came out of our stakeholder process when we developed the code, and also as part of a one-year review that was conducted of the code, where we identified a need for additional support in developing ADUs. So this was developed to help to reduce barriers to housing and make it easier to develop ADUs. So the model plans make it easier to develop ADUs by reducing the cost, complexity, and time required to build an ADU. The library works to connect homeowners to designers. However, the city does not own these plans. Additionally, in March of this year, PDSD hosted a workshop to support designers who submitted model plans to the library, and the model plan library is open to any designer or firm with approved plans. It's worth noting that with these plans, they are just for building approval. The ADU still needs to go through full site review to ensure that it meets all site design standards that are unique to that particular lot or site. So let's talk about the differences between what we currently have and what the state is requiring us to do. There are really these six main areas. First of all, the number of ADUs allowed. Currently, it's generally one per residential lot. However, the new regulations will require us to permit 2 ADUs per lot, 1 attached and 1 detached, and additionally, a third ADU can be allowed on sites of an acre or more, provided that it is restricted to affordable housing. Additionally, the way the size of the ADU is calculated is changing. Right now, we have a process where 10% of the lot size up to 1,000 square feet with the 650 foot minimum are allowed on any size lots, maximum. Let me back that up. We have a 10% of lot size up to 1,000 square feet with a 650 foot ADU allowed on any lot size. However, under the new law, the calculation is going to be based on the size of the primary structure, which is up 75% of that floor area up to 1,000 square feet. Additionally, there's a shift in height. Currently, height of an ADU is limited to 12 feet, or if the primary residence on the site is 2 stories, then it's limited to the height of that primary residence. However, under the new regulations, maximum height will follow the zone where the property is located. This is generally 25 feet. So height permitted no longer will be able to be related to the height of the house that's on that site, the primary structure. Additionally, the parking minimums that I mentioned earlier may no longer be required. So it's up to the individual property owner to determine how or if parking will be required for a specific ADU. Additionally, and this section was new from yesterday, just to clarify, ADUs are currently not permitted in front yards of structures. However, under the new regulations, ADUs may be located within a front yard, provided the front setback within the applicable zoning district is met. So for example, if you have a front setback of 20 feet from the front lot line and the house is 50 feet back, you could put an ADU into the front yard, provided it meets that 20-foot setback. So that is definitely a change. Also, with regard to side and rear setbacks, previously they followed the regulations of the zone, generally 6 feet or 2/3 of the height of the structure. However, right now, under the new regulations, they're stipulating that the rear setbacks and side setbacks cannot be more than 5 feet from the property line. So that's also changing. Also, talking about, just coming back to that affordable housing, noted in the number of ADUs, it's worth mentioning that the law restricts requiring affordability requirements beyond the unit. If we go above what the state requires, let's say to a 4th unit, we could require affordability, but there are a lot of state regulations relating to affordable housing and rent control that keep us from requiring that. Oops, pardon me. Okay. So there are also a couple of areas where ADUs apply, or the new ADU regulations apply to certain situations. The first one is covenants, conditions, and restrictions, or CCNRs. These are private agreements which the city of Tucson does not administer or enforce. The city is also not a party to these agreements. That will not change with this regulation, but it's worth noting that the state bill does not supersede or prohibit restrictive covenants regarding ADUs, whether that's with an HOA or if there's perhaps some neighborhood associations that have similar covenants. Those are private agreements and need to continue to be enforced privately. There's also some information on short-term rentals in the bill. So basically, right now, the bill establishes how a city may, the new bill establishes how a city may regulate short-term rental of ADUs, but the city may require only that a short-term rental be owner occupied. However, when you read the regulations, administering these, such a requirement would be incredibly onerous and likely ineffective due to the following reasons. First of all, such regulations would only become effective as of the date of adoption of the new ordinance. A grace period of 3 years before enforcement could possibly be required, and the regulations would only apply after a change of ownership of a lot for an ADU. These items taken together, as well as the administration and tracking on something like that, would result in there being little effect to requiring something like that. There are also some impacts when it comes to the area of historic preservation. Historic review would still be required for any ADU proposed within a historic preservation zone or historic landmark. And they would be required to go through historic design review. The state law does not change that. The ADU also cannot be required to match the exterior design, roof pitch, or finishing materials of the primary single-family dwelling, and that is directly from the state law. However, HPZ design standards still apply. It's also worth noting that while the plans in our model plan library are pre-approved for building code, they are not pre-approved in terms of design. They still would need to go through zoning review for each site they are placed on, and historic review if they are in a historic preservation zone. So it'll be up to the homeowner to choose a pre-approved design that is compatible with their historic district, and there's only so much modification that can be made to a model plan by nature of them being model plans. Also, other HPZ design standards still apply, except where there are conflicts with state law as referenced above. Also relating to historic preservation in the National Register of Historic Districts is that, first of all, noting that these are not locally regulated and do not require that new development comply with any design standards or go through a design review process. However, homeowners are encouraged to consult with the State Historic Preservation Office to ensure that new development, including the construction of an ADU, does not change their contributing status. This is particularly important as there could be tax implications for changing their contributing status. So we strongly encourage that homeowners look into that before making any decisions. So based on all this analysis and background, we've come up with proposed code changes for ADUs within the city. These include addressing any inconsistencies in the definition, increasing the maximum number of ADUs allowed per lot. And one of the things we'd like to discuss when we get to the discussion component of this listening session is to hear from you whether ADU should be limited to an attached ADU or could either attached or detached be allowed. And also changing the way the maximum square footage is calculated to align with the state regulations, which I mentioned, going to a calculation, excuse me, based on the size of the primary home rather than the lot, and also retaining the minimum of 600 square feet for an ADU allowed on any lot with the maximum of 1,000 square feet. Other proposed changes include updating the maximum building height from generally 1 story to generally 25 feet based on the particular zone. Changing the setbacks to 5 feet as required, removing the parking requirements as mandated by the state law, and also the changes in allowing the ADU to be built anywhere on the lot rather than being restricted to the rear. And this comes out from the bill prohibiting more restrictive regulations that are currently in place for single-family homes, such as your front setback or building frontage. So we're going to pause and start the feedback component of the listening session. We want to hear what feedback people have on the proposed code amendment. Again, talking about the ADU proposed code amendment or any other comments related to that proposed code amendment. People are invited to raise their hands, and I will call on them as they come in. So one moment while I get settled on this. So Andrew Christopher.
Hi. So I have 2 questions. On the size of it, are you guys saying that we're choosing a path here? I was understanding that we had to change to the 10% lot size, or do we have an option to keep the existing formula?
We do not on the lot size in particular. We don't. There's maybe some flexibility on permitting an attached versus a detached ADU, but the lot size is prescribed.
Gotcha. Okay. And the second one is, can you elaborate on the implications to historic districts? I'm on PRS, so I don't know if there'll be a different conversation specific to that, but I wasn't quite sure. It says it can't be required to match the existing residence, but the HPZ design standards still apply. So I'm not sure what that means.
That is definitely confusing. So it basically comes down to that you cannot require kind of a clone of the existing primary residence as the ADU, but whatever ADU does get developed has to meet whatever design standards are in effect for that HPZ. You just can't say, you know, the primary home is tan stucco with a flat roof, so we need that ADU to also be tan stucco with a flat roof.
Okay. And then how does that relate to the height limitations? Would we still be able to enforce height limitations as we normally do in HPZs?
Height limitations would be based on the specific zone that's in place for a single family home. So it would be enforced based on those criteria, where previously you could tie the height limitation to the height of the primary residence. And so it is possible now that you would end up in a situation where the height limitation in that zone is 25 feet. The primary home is 14 feet. Somebody could go to a height of 25 feet under the soon to be adopted standards.
So Andrew,
Okay.
just related to like HPZs, so you know, height is based on the development zone. However, it does specifically state that it needs to be tied to the primary structure. It can't be any more than a normal single family home. So you might end up in a situation to where you're actually looking at the primary structures for your development zone heights. So it might make some small changes. I think what we're seeing here is that the majority of the process and the design standards still apply. However, there might be some kind of minor kind of limitations to that review that you used to maybe have related to kind of materials or potentially building height.
Okay, so we wouldn't be using the development zone to determine acceptable heights anymore.
You would, I think the way I read it, and we've been working with our city attorneys, is that you can still use the development zone, but you'd probably have to incorporate the principal structures in that development zone, as well as just like if you have an ADU and you're looking at other accessory structures, you have to look kind of a little more broadly at that.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay. Next is Erica Brayman.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi there. Yes.
Hi, sorry, I think I maybe missed something. I don't know if you mentioned this, but what factors would affect whether or not you had to maintain the previous number of parking spots?
So there are no factors for if you have an existing ADU now, that number of parking spots that you provided will still be in effect. But with the construction of a new ADU, once the code amendment occurs, we can no longer require any minimum parking.
Okay, interesting. I'm looking to buy a house soon with the intent to build an ADU, and so it's kind of just like figuring out what stuff to look out for. But that's good to know. Thank you.
Certainly, absolutely. Okay. Next is Ken Scoville.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Oh, good. Again, I'm concerned about the historic preservation zones and the historic districts. And typically in most of the historic zones, it's the front of the house and the streetscape and the historic landscape that's of the greatest concern. With an ADU in the back, that wouldn't be, and there's other additional dwelling units now in historic zones and all of that. Could you clarify again, within an historic zone, an ADU in the front, how much of a setback and all of this would be to have one be in the front?
Certainly, it's going to apply inside or outside of a historic zone. The ADU has to meet the front setback established for that zone. And so if the front setback is 20 feet, then the ADU can be 20 feet from outside of that 20-foot front setback, if there is room for it, essentially is what it comes down to. So if you have like an instance where a home is well within that setback, and so there's space for one, under the way that the law is structured, you could place a house there.
Okay, now, and again, this would be for the historic districts also, but it might be if you start compromising the historic integrity, they would start losing, and you're going to have a lot of unhappy people in historic districts with an investment that's significantly endangered.
I completely agree. And unfortunately, this is a law that was adopted by our state legislatures, and we are simply being told that we must implement it because, yeah.
I wonder if there's going to be a challenge where this is going to be a referendum on this.
Certainly, I don't have a crystal ball, but it seems like it's pretty, people have a lot of concerns about what it's requiring.
Typically, when it gets down to money, if your house is a $900,000 house in a historic zone right now or a historic district, and that might be at risk, let alone the tax situation in districts, you would think that there's going to be a referendum on this.
Yeah, I certainly, I don't know how many people have been communicating with their state representatives about this, but that might be happening as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Certainly, thank you. Let's see, Nicole Sanderson.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thanks for hosting and giving all this information. My opinion is that in every case, we should go with the least restrictive option. Just acknowledging the scarcity of housing, the dramatic increases of housing costs in the last 5 years, the homelessness crisis. I think this is a good opportunity for Tucson to, if we're going to make changes anyway to comply with the state law, to even go above and beyond in terms of modifying some of the previous restrictions that we had. I think we should maybe look into allowing people to waive the 70% max lot coverage restrictions too if they do add an ADU. I think the front setbacks are too restrictive in many cases as well. And I do think we should also look into, like California has recently done, making it possible to subdivide and sell the ADU as a separate home with a separate address after building it. I think that would go a long way towards solving the housing affordability issues. My concerns are that we just don't have enough housing, especially in the city of Tucson, and that most new housing units in the region are getting built 10+ miles from the city center outside the transit network. It's that's probably the worst option for all of us. So, you know, to do our best to address the housing and homelessness crises, I think we should always move for the least restrictive options.
Great, thank you for your feedback. Let's see, Meredith Aronson.
Yeah, hi, good evening, and thanks for hosting this. I do have I have a number of comments, but I have an initial question. I'm assuming that the direction from Mayor Council is with regards to compliance. You're not going at this point in time to take on refinements of our existing ADU policy. I'm assuming that. I just want to clarify that.
Correct, that's the intent. What we're trying to avoid is getting bogged down in lots of other changes that could jeopardize our ability to meet the deadline.
Great, as I thought. Second question, I actually was quite surprised to hear about the CCNRs that I put in the chat. I just want to clarify, if a neighborhood association, is this a grandfathered context before January 2025? If they make a change to their CCNRs to essentially divest themselves of all of this wonderful opportunity with ADUs, that's possible?
That
Meredith, the way I read it is that even if you add new CCNRs after the bill passes and things of that sort, is that they would still be enforceable. So yeah.
I'm traumatized by that. I mean, I just see that based on the context of neighborhoods as deeply troubling to this strategy. And I don't know how, I understand the state, but I actually do wonder if there's something to be done locally about that. That was quite surprising. I could see for private developments, I don't understand that in the context of neighborhood associations. They were private when they were formed as CCNRs and now run by these quasi organizations all over the city. So just, I think that's complicated, right? And I think that's troubling for your strategy. Let me just charge forward. I don't know what to do about that, but let me just say, I find that deeply troubling for the strategy. A couple of comments. There's weird language in the HB 2720 that, you know, the second phrase, even for the 1 acre, shall be rented or sold to households earning a certain amount. Does that mean there's an opportunity for a land split in there? Mm-hmm. And therefore the language is to be rented or sold, or is that an error?
The way I'm reading it, it says shall be rented to households earning up to 80% of area median income. Which section are you?
Oh, I pulled this down last week from the bill, I thought.
So Meredith, I will say this is that I have seen multiple copies of like this bill that have changed over the last like 2 weeks or so. So
Okay.
it may have been in the previous bill, but the most recent one just says rented. That's
good to know, because that just seemed very, very strange, but much like a prior comment, boy, that would be wonderful to imagine smaller lot sizes. And I'm assuming in the implementation of this is where things like proof of AMI, what is it short-term versus long-term rental? You know, who's managing that within, all of that is the implementation, not the policy. Is that correct?
That's correct. And we're working with other cities and municipalities to get an understanding of kind of how they're doing this and they're addressing this. So we're kind of learning from each other at this point.
Great. I do want to reinforce the comment earlier about historic neighborhoods. I'm in Broadmoor, which is a historic neighborhood. It's an interesting challenge, having spent, I don't know, 10 years on the part of the neighborhood to get historic designation and all of the investments that came with that. And there aren't a huge number of properties that could be lost in that designation of the contributing properties. So again, not in the compliance, but rather in the execution. I wonder if there's something very intentional the city could do in the execution to ensure there's direct communication with homeowners who are applying for these ADU permits and taking a far more proactive stance about that.
So Meredith, just related to that, I just want to kind of mention that, you know, the way it's drafted is basically it would have the same setbacks as a single family dwelling near, and I'm speaking kind of from personal experience in my neighborhood, but other neighborhoods, there aren't that many homes that are actually set back enough that would actually provide enough room to put it in the front yard. So I think it probably has minimal impacts. But there are some lots where there's homes that are set back along a large distance. I'm thinking of a couple of them in my neighborhood where you could potentially put that ADU in the front. I'm not entirely sure how often that situation would occur.
Okay, that's good to know. That would be an interesting data problem.
Yeah.
And then lastly, not because I care, because I love the changes in the parking context for our future as a city. What is the impact? We're not dense enough here to worry about it, but there are neighborhoods where the parking permits are part of living in a structure, right? Will individuals have the opportunity, if they have an ADU that does not require parking, to request a second parking permit? I don't even know how that system works, but it seems to me there are parts of town where that might matter to people. And is anyone thinking about that? Again, that's more execution than it is the compliance question, but I think these are refinements that are going to surface in angry phone calls for quite some time. So
thanks, Meredith. Well, yeah, that's a good feedback. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Brandon Matheson.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, just a few questions. Well, can you hear me okay? I think you can.
Yes.
Just one comment real quick. Just as far as feedback, I would just echo, you know, the opinion I heard earlier about emphasizing least restrictive to increase housing options. I understand the concern about the front yard, but, you know, can't imagine there being any harm in the backyard. My first question is, must the two ADUs consist exactly of one attached and one detached ADU, or did I hear you say that that's where you're seeking feedback?
We're definitely seeking feedback on requiring attached versus detached.
So are the options on the table that you could have, for example, two attached, two detached, or any combination, or restricting that to one scenario or the other?
What we've been discussing is one detached and one attached as a possibility. I think you may conceivably able to do two attached. I'd have to double check the language though to make sure there's not something in there that would prohibit that.
Okay, so am I hearing that two detached would not be allowed?
No,
It basically would just provide for more flexibility. So the bill says one attached and one detached. This would be, you know, basically saying you can potentially do two detached units, or yes, I suppose you could potentially do two attached units.
Okay.
But yeah, it's just providing that additional flexibility versus just having one attached and one detached. And we're just looking to get feedback from the group on that. Okay,
yeah, and if for my 2 cents, my feedback would be why restrict it to one scenario or the other? I can't imagine, you know, I would think less restrictive would be far better. I don't know if there's any arguments even for restricting one way or the other. The other question, another question is, how is restricted affordable housing defined? Maybe it's in I imagine it's in the bill, the approved bill language.
correct.
Yeah.
I'm going to.
No, it's fine. Yeah, so I have it in front of me, so I can just, so we put it in the text, but it's or in the chat, but it's restricted to affordable dwelling unit means a dwelling unit that either through a deed restriction or a development agreement with the municipality shall be rented to households earning up to 80% of your income.
Okay, got it. It's a standard definition. And then our 2 stories, it sounds like generally allowed because 25 feet is typically the maximum. Is that what I heard?
Generally, yes, for most of the residential zones.
Okay. And the 75 rule, I assume it applies to each ADU, not both?
We believe so. There's still some discussion happening around that, but when you look at the intent of the law, it's consistent with that.
With it being for each ADU?
For each ADU, correct.
And are there any implications for utilities? I was at the city today and got moved over to the Tucson water, and apparently if there's any requirement to meter these separately, then for each, I guess I'm talking, well, actually I'm two different things. Will each of the ADUs be allowed to be, would they all be allowed to be on one master meter, or is there any expectation of individual metering required?
Some of that has to do with whatever's required by the utility provider, those would still apply, or if there's something required by the building code, that would still apply. This does not change any of the building code requirements. So I know that doesn't give you an answer specifically, it may be case by case, but generally whatever like Tucson water would require is still required.
Yeah, and I will say that we have been allowing for, at least currently, we have policy that allows for you to share utilities, at least for electricity. We'll have to take another look at how that might be impacted by having an additional unit or some things of that sort, but that's what we've been doing so far.
Okay. Yeah, the reason I asked that question is I mean, if there's no coordination with the utilities, that actually in and of itself could be potentially a completely limiting factor on all of this. For example, if moving on to the lot split issue, apparently Tucson Water requires 15-foot frontage for each lot. So if you were to have an ADU in the back, and then if you were to split that, unless you were able to provide kind of a flag configuration, apparently you can't even do that. Tucson Water would, I mean, their requirements would prohibit that. So I'm wondering, if there's any intention to coordinate with the utilities that way, or if it's just going to be each individual department or utility is going to handle that separately.
Yeah, we generally do coordinate with the utilities, and we're coordinating on several projects, so we will be coordinating with them.
Okay, great, thank you. Thanks for holding this meeting.
Thank you. Let's see, Diana Lett, and then Brad Jones after that.
So I keep hearing that the setback will be as in the code. And my question is, does that mean the underlying zoning, or do overlay zones continue to apply? Specifically, I live in an NPZ, and the NPZ specifies that any new construction must meet the front setback of the existing construction on the block. And that varies a lot because some of the streets have been widened. So does that particular language that new construction must have the same front setback as the existing
You froze.
Yeah, I kind of want to wait for Diana to come back before we answer the question, but we can talk to it in a second. I think this is similar to HBZs, to where the requirements for the NPZ, as far as the setbacks go, they would have to go through the NPZ review just like they normally do, and they would have to adhere to those setbacks that would be normally there for a single family residence. So this historic setbacks, as you're speaking to. when Diana comes back, I'll send her a message.
Okay, that's perfect. All right, Brad Jones.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Just a quick comment on the 10% of lot maximum at 1,000 feet, and then the 75% of primary residence. Would it be possible, and is it to just say either or, whichever is greater, so that those houses or those individuals with homes less than 1,200 square feet are not limited? That would be my first question, and it doesn't seem like that would be a challenge or a problem with staying in conjunction with the bill. And then related to the ADUs, detached, yes, big advocate for them both being able to be detached, number one. And then our garage conversions, which include a kitchen and a bathroom, would they be considered an attached ADU? And if someone made that transition within their home today, does that mean under the new rules, they would only be limited, or if there already is one in there today, would they only be limited to one additional ADU, be it attached or detached?
So if it's a garage conversion of an attached garage that is currently part of the house, then it would be construed as an attached ADU. So that they would still be permitted to have an additional ADU beyond that. Does that track? Or
You're saying that would be the case moving forward?
that would be the case moving forward, correct?
Okay.
Yeah. In terms
Okay,
of
thank you.
certainly. In terms of the size calculation, I'd have to look a little more closely at it, but you know, it's just important that we comply with the letter of the new state requirements regardless, in terms of basing it on that. Thank you. Let's see. Erica Brayman.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize that my hand was still raised. I will lower that. I didn't know you had to manually lower it after you answered.
Oh,
sorry.
No worries, thank you. Let's see, Mary Rose.
Hang up. Question I have, is there a minimum size? The ADU I'm considering putting on my lot, the lot is 8,000 square feet. The house is 1,210 square feet. I wanted to put about a 350 square foot ADU.
There is not a minimum size associated with the ADU, provided that it meets all other building code requirements.
Okay, because I had read the 650 or 1,000 foot, so I was thinking maybe it meant that, you know, it had to be 650 minimum.
Oh yeah, no, it's 650 maximum regardless of the size of your lot. So even if you have a relatively small lot, you could go up to 650 square feet.
Okay, the other question I have, I do have a storage building, just a storage building that's 300 square feet. I would still be able to put an ADU on my property.
That's correct. So as long as you meet all of the other maximum lot coverage standards, so it would need to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. But that storage building does not count as an ADU because it's not being occupied as such.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Andrew Christopher.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me hold off on that. I want to make sure everybody had a chance to speak. I misnoted that. I meant Michael Bonamero.
Hello, sir. Yeah, a quick question. I think it was about a year ago, April or May, that the city council and the mayor had directed the city manager to look into lowering the impact fees on ADUs. Currently, I have an ADU, it's like 550 square feet, and it's
Mhm.
$2,600 just for an impact fee. Was that ever addressed? Were there ever changes to that?
I don't believe that there have been any changes made at this point in time. And for the purposes of this particular amendment, we're not looking at impact fees. I'm not sure exactly where that currently stands though in process.
Okay,
The
thank you.
city's actually working on an update to our impact fees right now. We're doing our every 5-year review and update. So there'll actually be some opportunity for public input this fall regarding the proposed impact fees, and those are slated to be adopted early next year.
Is there a public meeting or something I should look
Nothing
out for?
scheduled, but I would say, stay tuned to kind of what's happening with this city, because there will be opportunity for public input about our impact fees.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Kathy Kubish.
Thank you. I had to find the button. I'm curious how many permits that the city has issued for ADUs in the last few years, if you see that number going up, and also whether you see them concentrated in any particular part of town.
Those are very good questions. And I know I have the data where we have information showing mapped where they are located as well as the permit numbers. I don't have those figures right off the top of my head at the moment. I don't know, Dan or Corn, if you've got those figures.
Hi, Kathy. I don't know if we have updated numbers. I can look back and find the most recent numbers we have related to this. I do know that they have, it had a bit of a slow start, but we've seen some momentum, especially in the last probably 2 or 3 months with some of the model plans being utilized by residents. So let me see if I can find that data, and I'll put it in the chat for you.
Excellent.
Is there anyone with their hand up who has not yet spoken who would like to speak? Okay. Let's go back to Andrew Christopher then.
Okay. So I heard a comment earlier about maybe adding to the language of the 75%, and I do think that's a good idea. So maybe we could keep the 660 square foot would be the the minimum allowable. I think that would be helpful. There are a lot of spots in town where like the primary may only be 800 feet. So it would help in those cases. I am wondering though, as part of the ADU process, say if you had an existing primary that is like 700 or 800 square feet, when you apply for the ADU permit, could you essentially try to build a new single family, like a primary, and then convert the existing primary to an ADU in that process?
I have seen that done in the past, yes.
Okay, so maybe that minimum is less important in that context. The other question I had was, the way I understand the mini dorm portion of the code is that no more than 5 unrelated people can occupy a household, essentially. How is that currently applied to ADUs, and is there anything in the bill that would change that?
There currently that is not applied. Familial relationship is not applied to the ADU ordinance. There is some language within the code about not being able to apply that to rental of ADUs within the new law, not being able to apply that to rental of ADUs. So we're definitely going to need to circle back and look at that portion of the UDC to make sure that it's either consistent or we may need to make some changes as well.
Okay, because I know that the county assessor definitely enforces owner occupancy from a property tax perspective. Have you all had any conversation with them about maybe there's some enforcement arm within the county that could enforce owner occupancy of all these ADUs. I'm just seeing the likelihood of, you know, investor buying a house, putting down 3 ADUs and essentially running like a mini dorm. I don't think it's an issue in my neighborhood, but I know a lot of neighborhoods where people would be up in arms about a situation like that.
We won't be able to enforce owner occupancy in a case like that. There may be some questions about also not requiring familial relationship. So I think that would be extremely difficult for us to start enforcing. But I definitely hear the concerns about sort of corporate development of these and what the impacts might be in those cases.
Yeah. Okay. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. Erica Brayman.
Thanks. It was on purpose this time.
Okay.
I just wanted to kind of have a comment because I actually moved to Arizona recently, to Tucson, kind of specifically because of the ADU laws and how permissive and how many possibilities there were. Because I have a disabled family member who is really excited to have the opportunity to kind of live semi-independently within his means. He can't work, lives on Social Security. And so just for everyone who, you know, I'm not crazy about Airbnbs and stuff either. So for everyone who's like has concerns and is like helping work through them and helping make this a possibility for people who, for whom this is kind of like an opportunity that's so special that like we relocated to here, like in part to take advantage of it. So I just really appreciate everyone who's putting in their voice and helping us all like work together to make something that we all can deal with.
Great, thank you, I appreciate it. Ken Scoville?
Yes, I just wanted to add the one person that was speaking about finally maybe getting affordable housing. I have an architect friend and he's designed several ADUs, and just construction costs and all the other things involved with it, it's not inexpensive. The time the unit's finished, it's going to be a sizable amount of money. And then if somebody's going to want to rent it or that kind of thing, it's still not really that kind of affordability that maybe some people are expecting. So I just think I'd be curious to see what the city is telling people when they think this is going to be affordable housing. It may just not be.
Thank you, I appreciate it. See, Brad Jones.
Yeah, sorry, I should have asked this before, but I neglected to. When you're putting in multiple units, whether they're attached or detached, is the 1,000 square foot limit going to be per device, or is per unit, or combined? And I understand if you're still underneath the 70% threshold or whatever it is in terms of total coverage, can there be 2 that are up to 1,000 square feet?
We believe that that's going to be per unit, provided that you meet all the other requirements and not cumulative. Thank you. Let's see, Michael Bonomo, excuse me. You just have your hand up still. Okay. Has anybody who hasn't spoken like to speak at this point in time? Is there anyone who has spoken who would like to speak again? Okay, then let's get back into the presentation. Yes.
Carver, David Armette is trying to raise his hand physically. Oh, okay. maybe just reach out to him.
I didn't see that. Yes, Mr. Armette, yep. Please go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. There was a scroll on the bottom. Someone had typed in, I have no idea who, but said, what would the impact be on your property taxes to have an ADU?
It's certainly going to be taxed as an improvement on the property. And so the Pima County assessor will determine what the value of that is and tax it accordingly. I'm not able to really answer specifics, but I can assume that your property taxes will go up when you make that improvement to your property.
Okay. And also, just to reiterate what someone else had asked about, so was it a typo on one of the slides that said 650 minimum? It was supposed to be 650 maximum? And is that what without? Sorry?
650 maximum regardless of the lot size.
Okay.
So if you have a small lot, you could still do up to 650 square feet.
Yeah, because the text had read minimum.
Yeah,
okay.
We'll correct that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy Kubish.
Yeah, it's me again. I work for the Pima County Assessor. And so I can answer more or less that question that the gentleman had. Your square footage will be added to your tax bill along with the year of construction. So that will, say equal 1,000 square foot built in 2024 and whatever. So the other implication is the possible rental impact. It's not terrible, but it does add some money to your taxes. So you've got two results there. You've got the added square footage, you've got the new construction date, and you have the possibility of the rents. So yes, your taxes will go up.
So if it's not being rented at all, it's just a mother-in-law, literally? That would
if it's a mother-in-law, then it would be included all owner occupied, because that would include family. But the square footage and the new construction date would both be factored.
New construction, does that mean the newer it is, the more expensive it is as far as property taxes? I don't know.
Yes. Yes, it does.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Peter Williams.
This may actually be a follow-up to what Kathy was just saying. I understand the mother-in-law situation being that's sort of the same family. Is there a difference in terms of taxes between the short-term rentals, Airbnb, whatever, and long-term rentals? And part of the reason I'm asking is it seems that long-term rentals actually help with concerns about, call it densification of housing, whereas short-term rentals do not, because these are people who are coming in for, whatever the reason is, they're going to turn over and leave. That's not helping the densification of residences in the city of Tucson. But help me if I'm misstating that. It seems that that's the case. But I'm curious also, Kathy, about the tax implications or the differences between those two, short-term and long-term.
I've been retired for 10 years, and I can tell you that there was a time when those short-term rentals, those Airbnbs, were taxed as commercial properties, and that is a much higher tax rate. But I don't know what they're doing now. To me, that's changed. So that would be a question to ask the assessor's office.
Thank you. Andrew Christopher, did you have a question or just that your hand is up?
Sorry, no.
Oh, no, just wanted to make sure. All right. let's move on then. I have a couple more slides that I want to talk about. One is the timeline for this code amendment and what our expectations are. So we're conducting our stakeholder and public outreach right now. That will be wrapped up this month in July, and we are then sending, or we're drafting. I'm not sure what happened there. I just lost
Carver,
my
we
screen.
lost your screen.
Yeah, I don't know why that just stopped. Hold on just a second. I apologize. Well, it looks like my PowerPoint just crashed.
Here, hold on. I'll pull it up and share.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Give me 2 seconds.
Yeah.
And I'll get there.
Yeah.
There we go. Oh, it didn't work. Sorry, guys. If I can figure out.
It did. We can see the screen.
Can you see the screen? Okay, we'll just do it for this. It just wouldn't let me fill my screen, I guess. There we go. That should do it. There we go.
So where we are in the process is that we're conducting our stakeholder outreach. We are making changes, proposed changes to the code, and we'll be finalizing that code amendment in the month of August and sending it to the Planning Commission for what is called a study session. At that point in time, the Planning Commission will have the opportunity to review, become familiar with the proposed code amendments, make any suggestions, ask questions, those sorts of things. And then from there, we will request that the Planning Commission set a Planning Commission public hearing for the month of September. During that, the public will be given the opportunity to speak on the proposed code amendment, and that will either be in person or virtually. We're doing hybrid Planning Commission meetings at this point in time, and the public's invited to provide their input. From there, the Planning Commission will be asked to forward the item to Mayor and Council for their review and consideration, along with an additional public hearing that will be in person. We're shooting for having the item to Mayor and Council by or during the month of October of 2024, so that we can get action on that and get it adopted and in place by that January 1st deadline. So any questions about the process going forward? Then on the next slide, we have discussion, or what I mentioned earlier in the presentation. We have the opportunity for you to provide any written comments at the link below, and we can drop this in the chat so people can provide any comments if you didn't want to provide a verbal comment this evening, or if you think of anything else that you may want to provide over the next several days. Feel free to drop it in there. You have the opportunity to provide your contact information or provide it anonymously. It's your decision on that. We just want to make sure that we get as much feedback as we can on this. And also, please note when providing feedback that we are really just discussing the ADU feedback now. The middle housing bill that I mentioned early on, the preservation, has a longer time suspense on it, and we will be conducting listening sessions on that once we get further along in the ADU code amendment. So any additional questions or comments? Okay, hearing none. Thank you all for your feedback. Thank you all for taking the time this evening to participate. We really appreciate it. And everyone have a great evening.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate you coming out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.